Chief Rabbi, good morning to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us this morning. Two issues I'd like to pick up on. We don't have all day, I'm afraid, to unpack everything, but just first of all, the comments that I'm sure you're aware of off the back of the letter suggesting there's no apartheid in Israel. How do you feel about that, and do you stand by that statement?
Absolutely. There is absolutely no apartheid in Israel. Within the borders of the state of Israel, there is complete equality of every citizen, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Israeli, Arab. Everybody has the right to vote. Everybody who represents in the Knesset, is in the judiciary. In fact, the judge that sentenced former Israeli President Katzab to prison was actually an Arab judge. And it is a state in which there is complete access to all of the state facilities by all of its citizens. There is complete equality within the borders of the state of Israel. To accuse Israel of being guilty of apartheid is to be completely detached from the reality, and frankly is an insult to the victims of the real apartheid, because if everything is apartheid, there is no such thing as apartheid. And I think it's a terrible injustice and a defamation of Israel to accuse it of apartheid. There, of course, in the territories of the West Bank and Gaza, there is an ongoing dispute since the 1967 war of how to resolve the status of those, and those can only be resolved through negotiations. Successive Israeli governments have offered for the establishment of a Palestinian state in these disputed territories, and each time those have been rejected. And I think that really at the heart of all of this is that the Palestinian people are suffering because of the result of the Hamas leadership of the Palestinian people. It is doing them no service at all. The human suffering on the ground is terrible, and it is because of the militant philosophy of Hamas. Its charter makes it very clear that it wishes the extermination of every Jew in Israel, the destruction of the Jewish state. There is not talking about the establishment of a Palestinian state within those territories. It is talking about destruction and the genocide of all Jews in Israel. So that makes it impossible to reach a peace settlement. And that is the crying shame and the tragedy, because religion should be about peace. Shalom, it should all be about peace. And that's why I was so disappointed in the Muslim Judicial Council, in the fact that I reached out to them. I phoned them personally and in fact made a public statement calling on them to join me in the message of peace and tolerance here in South Africa. Because the real tragedy of the Middle East would be if South Africans turn on each other. We cannot have that. We need, and they rejected those overtures and publicly. And I want to use this opportunity to call on them again. The only way forward is through peace. Religion has to be a force for peace in the world. And that is unfortunately the real tragedy of this, right across what is happening in Israel and the Middle East, and indeed across the African continent. Because these are serious matters which are affecting our continent. Across the border, in Mozambique, there is an ongoing war which is being conducted by organizations which are affiliated to Hamas. And we cannot allow militant religion to destroy lives. And that is what is happening in Israel. And as South Africans, the South African dream has always been unity and diversity, that we come together as South Africans, we care for one another, in an atmosphere of peace and tolerance. That is the only solution to our social strife here in South Africa. And that ultimately, there is such an easy solution for peace in Israel and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's waiting. But as soon as but Hamas is a militant organization with a militant theology, and until we are able to liberate the Palestinian people from the military theological dictatorship of Hamas, there will be ongoing tragedies in that region.
Chief Rabbi, let me come in quickly here, if you don't mind. I think what many people are getting upset about as well, depending on which side you sit on here, as far as what is happening inside Israel and inside Palestine, what is upsetting, it seems to many South Africans, is the use of the word apartheid as well. And it seems many are suggesting that it's offensive to not draw a comparison between what happened here in this country and what's happening over in that part of the world. Briefly on that, what is your response to that criticism?
My response is that it's offensive to use the word where it doesn't apply. When you apply the word in a context in which it has no application whatsoever, that is a desecration of the holy memory of those who suffered by the real apartheid. Because if you compare a free democratic country in which every single citizen has the right to vote, there is no segregation, there is an integrated society, you compare that to apartheid, then you have desecrated the memory of apartheid. I, as a South African, find it offensive to use the word apartheid in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Just a final question to you then, Chief Rabbi. I'm sure you would have either seen or heard part of the interview I had with Reverend Frank Chikane. If you didn't, forgive me, let me just remind you and viewers what he said. And I quote, the best way, he says, I was shocked that he, as in you, I beg your pardon, Warren Goldstein, could make such a statement about Israel. The best way to do this is to visit Palestine and Israel together so we can show him. I'm sure when he goes to Israel, he doesn't go to the other areas. Will you go to Palestine and Israel with Reverend Frank Chikane, A, and B, what do you make of that comment from him?
I want to say this. I'm happy to go with Reverend Chikane anywhere, and I'm happy to join him on such a trip. Reverend Chikane is an old friend. We've known each other for many years and engaged on many matters. But let me say this to Reverend Chikane. I'm happy to come with you. I have no fear of the facts. The facts are completely in support of what I set out to the President, that there is no apartheid in Israel. So I have no fear of the facts. I have no fear of the reality on the ground. But Reverend Chikane, if we are going to go to Israel and to the Palestinian territories, then I think in order to understand that, in order to understand what Hamas and that violent theological philosophy is causing, the havoc that it is causing in the region, we need to, on the way first, Reverend Chikane, let's go visit Mozambique, the northern part of Mozambique, where more than 500,000 people have been displaced. BBC reports refer to the beheadings of children in Mozambique. The more than 4,000 Christians who have been murdered in the last year, 90% of whom in Africa. So if we want to understand who Hamas is and we want to understand that conflict, Reverend Chikane, let's start on our doorstep. Let's go to Mozambique. Let's go to Nigeria. Let's go to Somalia. Let's go to Yemen. Let's go to Iran. Let's go to all of these countries and understand the violent theology which is causing havoc across our continent. And I think it is incumbent upon the South African Council of Churches to start to speak up on behalf of the persecution of Christians, of moderate Muslims, and of Jews throughout Africa and across the continent. We need to come together. Moderate Muslims, Jews, and Christians need to come together to fight this violent theology, to stand together, people of moderation and of peace. And that is going to be the only solution, people of goodwill. Religion cannot be a force for destruction and violence in this world. We need to come together in peace. Reverend Chikane, join me in that campaign to bring good people together, people of faith who do not believe in violence. And it is in that we will be able to realize the dream and the blessing of peace.
Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein, thank you indeed for your time responding to a number of issues. One is the open letter to the President saying there is no apartheid in Israel, and also the call by Reverend Frank Chikane, who I spoke to yesterday on this show, saying he would like to go to Israel and Palestine with the Chief Rabbi. We've just had the Chief Rabbi saying he will do that, but there is a much bigger discussion, he says, to have before they reach the borders